Greetings from the Arkansas Times. I'm Max Brantley. It's Thursday, November the 17th. The news is still the same. Donald Trump is still scheduled to be the next president of the United States. Interesting story in the New York Times today, saying that Democratic senators are looking for ways to work with the new president on perhaps some issues of similar interest. Infrastructure spending, for one, that could drive a wedge in the Republicans. Certainly worth trying now until you learn it's too late. We hope and trust the Democrats won't be working on with the new president on Republicans' plans to speedily end Obamacare and Medicare in the first year of his presidency. Yes, end Medicare. They'll privatize it. That's as good as the end of it. It'll be a terrible day for America when that happens, but they seem to have the wind at their back on that. Also in the Donald Trump vein, Senator Tom Cotton is filling Twitter up with complimentary remarks about Trump and about the people working for him, particularly Steve Bannon, the white nationalist who's known for a number of racist and misogynist posts in his former job as head of an online web news service. Cotton does seem to be angling for a job in the Trump administration. Perhaps the defense secretary will be the beneficiary, of course, if that were to happen, if not the rest of the country. Back home in Arkansas, Senator Jim Hendren, a Republican, has introduced a constitutional amendment for the next legislative session that would end the so-called fiscal session, the every other year strictly budget session. It's been a waste of time and money by and large. He'd like to go back to just having 60-day sessions every 2 years. It costs the state less and there'd be less mischief. I don't think it's a bad idea. This is one I think I can get with a Republican on. Other ideas for the legislature for me is some legislation to provide more accountability on child protective services. This issue was brought to the fore again this week with the conviction of Mauricio Torres of capital murder and the horrific death of his 6-year-old son. This was a case in which he lost parental privileges. His wife had more children. There were reports of abuse, and despite the fact that they lost custody of children previously, for some reason or another, children weren't removed from the home. The result was the death of Isaiah Torres. Under the current law, the state claims that it must protect the confidentiality and interest of children and not explaining why these things happen and whether the state dropped the ball in such cases. Clearly, there's no longer anything to protect for Isaiah Torres. He's dead. We ought to know whether the state had any responsibility in his death. Elsewhere, Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin makes news. He has no real job as Lieutenant Governor except to preside over the Senate, but he gives a lot of TV interviews. One he gave yesterday was to make the point that federal law still makes marijuana a felony offense. He thinks there's still questions to be answered about medical marijuana in Arkansas. Funny thing for something that was approved by an overwhelming majority of voters. Tim Griffin likes looking after voters when it comes to doing things like having Republican control of the legislature. Will he really try to overcome medical marijuana approval by Arkansas voters remains to be seen, but it's a little troubling that he'd suggest it. Walmart was in the news today in a couple of different places. The Arkansas Supreme Court upheld a lower court ruling that Walmart could prevent picketing on its property by union organizers who like to point out the bad pay and work practices at Walmart. But the Supreme Court did say that the court order went too far when it banned union people from anything but purchasing at Walmart. Yes, you can still walk into the store and walk around and not buy anything. At least that was a small victory for the United Food and Commercial Workers. It's a funny irony that in the same day, the New York Times reports that labor unions in China are having an easy time relatively stirring up protests against Walmart for pay and working conditions there, and the Chinese government is standing aside while labor unions, which are required in China for stores like Walmart, are able to bring up some very unpleasant facts for Walmart. Do you really have more rights to speak in China than in the United States of America? Funny thing. Read our story by Benji Hardy on the Arkansas Times blog, arkansasblog.com, about a hearing yesterday at the State Pollution Control and Ecology Commission about a permit that allows a hog farmer in the Buffalo River watershed to take truckloads of hog waste from a factory farm run by a cousin of his and spread it on his land. This is more or less the functional equivalent of a new hog farm in the Buffalo River watershed, and we've got the Pollution Control Agency attorneys arguing how this is just nothing but a modification of a permit. If this is true, I guess we could become the hog crap capital of the world and ship it in from all over and spread it all over the Buffalo River watershed under this legal theory. It's a terrible thing. People ought to stand up for the Buffalo River and really the rest of the state if this is our idea of environmental regulation. Mike Huckabee had another Huckup this week. He posted on his Facebook page one of those fake news stories. This was one that was put out by a conservative website. It seemed to claim that after the election, liberal Jews at the Northwestern University did an anti-Trump vandalism on a church there. Well, Nobody said these were Jews or liberals that did this, and it happened 8 months ago. It didn't happen after the election. Mike Huckabee issued what he called an apology, but it really wasn't. He said he was just sorry about the date. He should have noted that it happened before the election, not after. And Mike Huckabee's made a lot of money leading trips to the Holy Land. Says why he meant nothing by characterizing people as liberal Jews. You could almost hear the sneer in his voice when he said it. We know what he meant. Finally, you say there's no good news. Duck Dynasty is in its final season. It ends in April, so we've got something to cheer about. I'm Max Brantley. I'll be back tomorrow.